Hello world, it's been a little while since I made a Photography 101 video. Suppose I should have thought a bit about that title because there are quite a few Photography 101s on YouTube. They don't usually feature some aging old goat bleating away about photographs instead of taking them. So I'll try and keep this bit of the video quite short. Okay, this is going to be a bit about the handling of my Olympus XZ-1 camera that I unboxed on YouTube about last April, so about 9 months ago or something. Because it's all very well, you know, admiring, you know, a gadget, you know, at first glance, but it's living with it that's the important thing. Okay, so here it is. Okay. So the first part, as I said, is going to be about the handling of the video, and then the next bit is going to be about image quality, in particular in relation to its claims of being like the ultimate low light compact digital camera. Okay, I need to make a couple of provisos before I start. When I mention the word DSLR, which stands for digital single lens reflex, which is like the equivalent of, you know, a single lens reflex 35mm film camera in today's digital age, I really mean the sort of new mirrorless cameras as well, especially the ones that have digital DSLR size sensors in them. For example, the Olympus pen cameras, I would, you know, put in the vaguely sort of DSLR breed. In other words, you know, they're meant to be replacements for your digital SLR. Okay, I'll start out by saying, actually, really, I don't believe this is meant to be a replacement for a DSLR camera. Okay, it's a compact camera. It's very, very small. Okay. See, you can see how it fits into my hand like that. Okay, that has its advantages and disadvantages. The first advantage being that it's very unthreatening. You can wander around a beautiful town or city with one of these and nobody will look at you, and you can take as many photographs as you like. I'm a fan of street photography, and I've done a lot of street photography practice with this camera because I don't feel like I'm anyone sort of out of the ordinary going around with a camera. And you know, it's not illegal to take photographs of people on streets, interesting looking people doing interesting things or whatever on streets, you know, it is an art form in itself. You think of the greats like Cartier-Bresson, and you know, even people like the guy on Digital Rev Photography, for example, on Digital Rev TV, the YouTube channel. He just walks around Hong Kong taking photographs of people. He has more balls than I've got, and you know, he's quite happy wandering around with, you know, huge cameras, doing what I like to do with this camera and just feel very insignificant doing it. Okay, so yeah, that is the big advantage of the size. The big disadvantage of any kind of small thing for taking photographs, i.e. a phone or a camera like this, is the fact that because it's so small, anything, you know, like camera shake, I mean, I don't have a particularly steady hand, but you know, any tiny movements like that are a lot more obvious. Okay, you really have to keep this thing as still as you can, unless you're out in heat wave conditions, where you can just, you know, set the camera to, you know, an optimum setting and then just you know, fire away at will, and you know, the shutter speeds will be fast enough to freeze any movement in your hand as well as any movement that's going on in the scene that you're taking a photograph of. So yeah, camera shake is a big kind of issue with anything like this. Okay, it has quite a robust strap, which oops, you can use to kind of offset that, okay? Put it out like that, for example, and take a photograph. Don't put your finger in front of the lens like I've just done. Take the lens cover off as well, and that's, you know, and that's cool, okay? So yeah, that's the first part of it. The second part really is that although it's got a lot of dials and buttons for a compact camera at any rate on it, okay, because it is so small, you have to be really careful, particularly with this mode dial, which gives you the PASM settings and the sort of other camera modes on here. It's very easy to knock, okay, and I've just knocked this into manual just by fiddling with it, okay. I normally want it on aperture priority, and yeah, okay. So be careful with that. The other thing is that although it has quite a lot of manual adjustment by just going to the buttons rather than going through menus, under pressure, I don't work particularly well under pressure. I need a wee bit of thinking time to do things. And under pressure, I will quite often forget which dial or which button does what, okay? And so what I have to do mentally is kind of zone out all of the unnecessary buttons and just concentrate on the ones which I really am going to need. Okay, in particular, once this is set to A for aperture priority, I just forget about it. Okay, when I'm doing street photography, I like to use the front dial. I'll take the lens off here, but I like to just use this front dial here to set one aperture which I think is going to be sufficient for the light conditions around. Okay, it's usually somewhere around about f5 on a sunny day, and you know, f3 or something like that on a not quite so sunny day. Okay, and just leave that as is. Okay, so that then the only thing I need to focus on is pressing the button and using the focus here whilst I'm viewing the picture. Okay, the autofocus on here is not particularly good. And sorry, my computer screen's gone into sleep mode, so I just need to put my password in. There I am, back again. All right, yeah. So yeah, I'll turn the camera on. Okay, I talked about this before. I've got my camera set up in black and white mode at the moment, but when you set the autofocus on here, its default is to set up its 11 autofocus zones, like that. It's like those green markings on the screen, and then the camera chooses where it wants to focus, and quite often that's not where I want to focus, partly because I like to sort of frame slightly off the wall pictures where the person in or the thing that I'm photographing is not necessarily in the center of the frame. Okay, and so what I like to do is just set one of these, and it's usually just slightly off center. It's gone again, there it is, if you can see that. It's just slightly off center, so that then I'm going around and I'm taking my photographs, and then if I don't want the subject in the place where it's going to focus, I move the camera and reframe the picture, so I've still got that one particular autofocus point working. Okay, slightly bizarre, slightly off the wall. Okay, this camera makes that very easy just by using these sort of arrow keys here on this sort of wheel around there. Okay, so then I don't have to then focus on doing too many other extraneous things. Obviously, if I'm out and I'm taking landscape photographs, or I've gone out with people, you know, specifically to take photographs of them, like on an assignment or something like that for my drama, quite often I take the photographs to promote the plays and what have you, and we go out and and we take photographs and stuff, then I'll play with the other settings. But just for going out and taking grab shots of street photography, I don't want to be thinking about the camera. Okay? And the other thing that I will often do, and this camera makes this very easy as well, is to just have the camera at my waist and not even look at it. Just have my thumb on the button, like that, you know, just pretend to be fiddling with it or something like that, and just let off a photograph. And, you know, quite often it fails and I don't worry about it. And at other times, you get a good picture, okay? So with handling, it has limitations due to the size, okay? But it also, it's provided that you work out a way of using it and adapting yourself to its strengths, it's very good, okay? Battery life, so-so. When I went to Paris last summer for a weekend, I actually ended up buying batteries in Paris because I was out, and I'd left the battery at the hotel, and so in the end I ended up, you know, sort of having 3 batteries, and I don't think that's a bad thing, really. You know, I haven't measured how many hours or whatever, but put it this way, on my first day in Paris, I went out at about 7 in the morning, taking lots of photos, and by about 10 I was worrying about how long the battery was going to last and desperately looking for somewhere where I could buy a battery. Okay, so you know, this is an issue, I think. But again, it's a small camera, it's not going to take a huge battery, and you know, the battery in here is very thin, so yeah. I think the battery that comes with it, the default battery that comes with it, is not as long lasting as some of the batteries that you can actually buy for this camera, okay? Certainly I bought one on eBay which claims to have a longer lasting battery life than the one that comes with the camera, okay? With those sort of mini gripes aside, I'm now going to sort of show you just a few photographs that I've taken with the camera, and just talk about its sort of USP, really. Its USP, unique selling point, is the fact that it has a maximum aperture of f1.8, which means that the lens hole will go very wide and supposedly be extremely good in low light conditions. All right, so I'm going to examine that, okay? Not necessarily, I very rarely have a camera set to f1.8 really, because any camera, particularly the more modest ones, even when you're talking DSLR wise, will perform best somewhere in the center of its aperture range, okay? This is to do with lens properties and stuff like that, which I don't really understand. But if you stop down, i.e. set to a slightly smaller aperture, you'll get a better lens performance than if you use it wide open. And conversely, at the minimum aperture, again you'll get distortion and that sort of thing. So, you know, don't go right with this camera. Its minimum aperture is f8. Okay, so if you sort of go down to about f6 or 7, you've probably got a better quality photo. Okay, so with those provisos, is this camera any good in low light conditions? All right, so I'm going to hand you over to my PowerPoint now that I made. Did I say PowerPoint just then? I meant Keynote. Sorry, Apple, for confusing you with Microsoft. But yeah, I've made a Keynote presentation of some of my photographs taken in a variety of light conditions for you to see for yourself. Okay, so here's a handful of photographs that I've taken with the camera, and I want to focus really on its performance in good light, bad light, in different light, and some of the techniques I've used just to try and, you know, validate the claims of this camera, really, because its unique selling point is its maximum aperture of f1.8, which is extremely good for a compact camera, and just to see whether or not it can live up to its claims, really. This picture I actually took in Paris last August, and I sent a handful of pictures in, including some of the ones that you see here, to Amateur Photographer magazine, which is a very well respected magazine, and forgot about them because they obviously hadn't printed them. And then suddenly in January, a few days ago, this huge box turned up at my house containing a rather swish camera bag and a note saying that one of my images had been published in Amateur Photographer magazine. So I quickly tracked down the magazine that it was in, and there it was, and it had won Picture of the Week on Chris Gatcombe's appraisal page. So I was very chuffed about that, really, and it goes to show that you don't necessarily need to have, you know, the most flashy DSLR camera to take good images. Okay, a very modest camera like the XZ-1 will quite often do the job. Okay, and the colours there are just very natural, and the exposure is absolutely perfect. I didn't have to do anything to that other than click the auto button in Aperture and leave it to it, really. And yeah, very pleased with that photograph. I'm very pleased with this photograph too. This was taken earlier on, but I had a bit of a fiddle faffle because I'd just been down on the metro taking photographs, and I'd left my aperture on a very wide setting, and I saw her and I thought, you know, quick, grab a photograph, and it ended up being very badly overexposed, particularly because you've got quite high contrast in that picture, and so I had to stop the aperture down. You know, we're in a sort of major heat wave here, and it was so bright that, yeah, I really had to stop that aperture down a lot to about f8 or something, which is the minimum aperture on the XZ-1 to get that photograph. And, you know, as you can see, it's taken, you know, it's coped very well at that setting. Okay, when I was down on the metro, I took some photographs at higher ISOs that didn't cut the mustard, really. You know, the light down there is completely different from the light, you know, out on the streets. And yeah, so in the end, I resorted to pretending that the wall on the left was a tripod, bracing the camera up against that, setting the ISO back down to 100, using a narrow-ish aperture. I think it's about f5 or something like that. And I took that photograph, and as you can see now, the noise is well controlled. There's a slight bit of movement in the people, which is only to be expected. It's dark, and you're going to get, you know, not particularly high shutter speeds, yeah, the lights are slightly overblown, but it's a pleasing image, and the cameras cope well, I think. This photograph I had to take handheld. I was in the Notre Dame, and, you know, I have to say that I absolutely adore this photograph. This photograph, for me, in Paris, that was going to be my money shot until I got it home and I put it on the computer. Well, in fact, really, until I printed it out. I printed it out at A4 size, and then I suddenly realised that actually it's far noisier as a picture than it ever looked on my iMac 21.5-inch screen. At that time, I didn't want to fiddle faffle with RAW mode, because in the past, when I used to use RAW mode with my compact and on a PC, it involved an awful lot of fiddle faffling, you could only do the most basic editing in RAW mode, and then you had to convert it to JPEG, and you certainly had to convert it to JPEG if you ever wanted to share the image via email or anything like that. But Aperture lets you totally forget that you're in RAW mode. You just import the pictures in, do whatever editing you like to do to them. When you're ready to share them out onto Facebook or Flickr or anything like that, it just handles all the conversion for you, and you just don't have to worry. And so really, I should have been using RAW mode here, because it would have resolved some detail. There's a on the print that I made, which is only an A4 print, and you know, any 10 megapixel camera ought to be able to print bigger than that without loss of detail. But because we're in low light, we're at, for the XZ-1, we're at a high ISO. There's a certain loss of detail, particularly where the boy and the man's face meet. The boy was also moving a little bit, which makes him look slightly less in focus, and that has slightly taken from the picture, but nevertheless I think it's a beautiful image, and it illustrates a photographer's maxim, really, which is that you should never let imperfect conditions stop you from taking a photograph, and you're better off having a slightly less perfect photograph than not having a photograph at all. And I'm certainly glad that I've got that photograph, and you know, I'm pleased with it despite the fact that it's not perfect. Okay. This is late evening, and I was watching skateboarders and cyclists near the Eiffel Tower. In fact, well, actually, the Eiffel Tower is a long way away there. And they knew I was taking photographs of them, and that particular cyclist was going round and round and round, watching me take photographs of him, and you know, he did the same stunt in the same place each time. You know, there was this kind of rapport going on between us. And you know, so I could just carry on taking photographs until I knew I'd actually got a good shot. And the one that I was after was kind of like that, really, where the front wheel of his bike is kind of matching the curve in the Eiffel Tower. And yes, you know, I'm really pleased with that. Yeah, in good light, the camera has actually, you know, frozen that action very well. Okay. Given that the XZ-1's noise performance is actually not particularly good above 400, I still, you know, see good photographs in the dark. And I was around Liverpool Street Station here, and I saw, you know, these really colourful lights of the building, and I squatted down, braced myself against something or other, and took that photograph. But I only took it on ISO 400. I'm in RAW mode this time, which is you know, beneficial. You know, we've got, you know, a lot of detail in that picture, because again, my aperture had to be wide open. It's does what, you know, a wide open aperture does. In other words, parts of the picture are in focus and parts of the picture are sort of blurred, and that's kind of made the windows of the large building, the second on the right, the slightly fuzzy at the top, which you might like it. It slightly annoys me, but I still like the picture. And again, I think the camera's actually coped very well there. But yeah, you know, you can't push it beyond, you know, sensible compact camera style boundaries. It's not a DSLR. Okay. I think there's also a misconception amongst you know, novice photographers about exactly what low light is. And I think you know, to us, when we think of low light, we think of extremes. You know, we think of, you know, indoors at night, or in a nightclub, or walking down the street at night, or something like that, when, you know, it's obviously dark. Cameras, you know, their definition of low light is, you know, much lighter than we think. And you know, my flat, for those of you who watch my YouTube videos, you know that you know, it's dark. It's in a basement. The front window looks out to a brick wall and railings, and you know, whenever a bus comes past, even on a bright sunny day like this was, we're going back to August now, you know, you just lose all your light. And so I again had to crank my ISO up. Again, I kept it to 400, seeing what my Parisian pictures at 800 ISO look like. I thought, you know, from now on I can't really go above 400, and so I'm at 400 ISO there. I've set the metering to spot metering, and my friend Adam, who was just off to university the next day, and he popped round for a cup of Earl Grey, and you know, we're talking about photography and stuff, and he let me take his photograph. I placed him with the window to one side, towards his right hand side, our left. Set the camera to spot metering, because I've had some good results with film using spot metering for portraiture, and I think it's actually worked really well. It's rendered the shadows very nicely, and you know, the majority of his face is in bright light, and you know, the shadows are very natural. I'm not necessarily certain that evaluative metering would have quite got the atmosphere there in that picture. Okay, but as you can see, the noise is starting to creep in even at 400 ISO. Okay, so thankfully the flash isn't too bad on the XZ-1. This is the built-in flash. There are a few sort of guidelines to using flash. One of them is to avoid bright walls, because the shadows can look very harsh on it. You know, I just think they just look really ugly. And also to try and keep your subjects approximately the same distance from the camera. If one of those people there had been too far away, then the flash would not have stretched out that far. And you know, he or she would have been very dark. You know, if they'd been too close, then they would have been you know, very harshly lit. So you know, you just have to take a little bit of care like that. I think that photographs actually work quite well. Very few telltale signs of flash. I don't recall having to correct anyone's red eye, but you know, again, my experience of any camera, regardless of, you know, whatever, you know, class of camera it is, whether it's film or whether it's a DSLR or whatever it is, you know, people get red eye. Okay, even with red eye reduction mode. But yeah, there was none of that here, and yeah, I think it's actually worked out very nicely indeed. Okay, tiny little bit of flashlight on my friend Hayley's forehead and cheeks, but you know, it's nothing too dreadful. Okay, and the Olympus XZ-1 has also got a very good black and white mode. You set it to monochrome. There are a few options to choose from there, but I just leave it to its default settings, and you know, it gives a, you know, a nice, a very pleasing black and white effect. Okay, and yeah, so there's a handful of my photographs. If you want to see more of them, I try to put sort of general interest pictures up on Flickr. There's my Flickr name. Just Google it and you'll find me. And yeah, I'd be really grateful if anybody would, you know, actually nip onto Flickr and look me up. Okay, all right. I thank you very much for watching. So I suppose what I'm saying really is that this camera is not a DSLR, okay, or a mirrorless variant of, okay. It's a compact camera. It's a high-end compact camera. It does photographs slightly better, I think, than lesser compact cameras, okay, particularly ones with even smaller sensors than this got. This has got a slightly bigger sensor than many of the compact cameras on the market, okay, and so images taken in medium to good light end up, for me, looking more natural than other compact cameras with smaller sensors. They don't look as good as DSLR photographs, even those older ones that had less megapixels. Okay, and that is purely down to, as I say, the sensor size. Okay, if you imagine 8 million people living in one Hong Kong apartment and then giving them the whole street, imagine, you know, the quality of life that they're going to get. and it's the same sort of thing, really. Crowding 8 million pixels onto a tiny sensor and then, you know, giving them a bit of space to breathe on a larger sensor tends to result in better images, because there's an optimum, for any sensor size, there's an optimum amount of megapixels that will fit on it, okay? And in the drive to sell things by supposedly technological improvements, the megapixel one is one that most people can jump on and understand. You know, i.e., this camera's got 8 megapixels, that camera's got 10 megapixels, that camera's with 10 megapixels is a better camera. It ain't always so. The thing is that once you go over that size, then the software algorithms tend to come in, you see. Olympus said, for example, with their pen camera range, that 12 megapixels on that micro four thirds sensor, which is the same size sensor, by the way, as the older E series of DSLR cameras, that, you know, 12 megapixels was their limit. And then suddenly, you know, within a few months of that statement, out comes 16 megapixel micro four thirds pen cameras, and what's happened? They've updated the software, and that processing software inside the camera has to be very harsh, and you know, in order to sort out the megapixel problem, i.e. the overcrowding of megapixels on a sensor. Okay, so with that in proviso, this is a jolly good camera, people, but with its limitations. It's a compact camera, it's not a DSLR. All right, ta-ra.